Actually, I do want to talk about one more thing before we wrap up, if that's okay. I know we don't
Yeah,
have all the
no.
time in the world, but in at least in our previous conversations, you've mentioned that you're for law and order, although
Mm,
it's sometimes considered like a Trumpian, and if
mm.
Trump is racist, that's a racist thing to say. What are you against blacks? Like what's wrong with you? Like that's people might say something like that.
Mm.
But you're also for accountability in law enforcement. How are you for law and order if you're also for accountability in law enforcement?
We cannot have law enforcement that is criminal in its conduct and behavior and think we have law and order. Law and order applies to every stakeholder, including the enforcers of the laws, including the writers of the laws. And so we have to have responsibility and accountability in order for us to have every stakeholder be adhering to law and order. Planting drugs on someone is not law and order, that's criminal. Abusing the inmates who are in your jail and or prison is not law and order, that's criminal. It's lacking accountability, it's lacking decency, it is inhumane. People seem to think that punishment is the only solution, and dehumanizing people who commit crimes is the only solution. They deserve it. That's why people can go to jail and be eaten alive by bugs in a jail cell because we forget about them and we dehumanize them. And in so many ways, our law enforcement and incarceration apparatus hardens people, traumatizes people when they go in and they come out worse, right? They give back to the community people who are not rehabilitated from whatever happened to them, nor habilitated, learning new skills. So I don't see any contradiction between law and order and responsibility and accountability and accountability. As a matter of fact, I think the four elements there have to be married together in order for law and order to exist, and also for people to be willing to respect law enforcement and the structure and writing of laws in the first place.
It's interesting that you say that because a lot of people have said, and the different circles that I bounce around in, you see conversations basically like ACAB referring to just the institution of law enforcement as being some inherently evil and racist thing. When you say inherently, you might go all the way back to, let's say, the inception of slavery and the slave catchers, and that's where the law enforcement units kind of came from, and different things like that. And it's like, well, is that the only place that law enforcement was ever? You go back to even the Roman centurions and the military units. It's like, is that a 1-to-1? Is that apples to apples? Maybe not. Like, and how? And I say that to say, like, how do you reconcile some of these discussions, and maybe misguided discussions even in pro-black circles, considering that he's like, hey, I'm pro-black, yeah, I'm kind of Republican-ish depending on the day. um, like, how do you reconcile that with yourself, saying like, hey, the institution of policing has been weaponized tremendously. Like the FBI has literally assassinated um, black people for being black and too loud about it. Like, how do you reconcile that and even be okay with the idea of saying law and order? Because somebody might say, well, that's a walking contradiction.
Yeah. Well, I speak to it as law and order and responsibility plus responsibility and accountability. So I marry them in the rhetoric. And I think to your point about the history, if you will, of sheriffs and deputies and all of those things being anchored in catching the enslaved people and punishing them and some other things, we can accept the reality of that, acknowledge the reality of that, acknowledge the problems of that, and still at the same time recognize that law enforcement is not going to go away, nor should we want it to. What we should want it to do is be accountable and responsible and be subject to the same criminal, civil, conduct related boundaries of the people that they are supposed to be protecting, but are enforcing laws upon and surveilling. So I think sometimes people feel like it has to be one thing or the other. Like I can't be pro black and be for public safety, right?
Mm-hmm.
And whether that
Mm-hmm.
public safety has on a blue uniform and is an operative of the state, or if that public safety comes through community based initiatives that come out of surveilling by the community themselves, right? Um, I am for public safety, and I do believe that law enforcement, as a part of the government apparatus, has a place there. It is about the quality of that, the honor of them actually showing up and behaving in a way that is honorable in order for people to feel inclined to even collaborate with, no less submit, right, to their presence. I don't know if I answered your question, but
No, I think you did a great job of clearing that up. More or less saying, according to what I heard, like, hey, law enforcement, yes, it may have a dark and dirty history, but their ability to show up every day and kind of earn the title of a community protector,
privilege.
and yeah, pretty much, yeah. I mean, it's the idea that you can just show up on somebody's block, or in somebody's neighborhoods, show up to somebody's home, and with the power of the state compel them to do whatever is considered a lawful order. That's a big deal. And if
It's
you
a
can't handle that, like, you need to go. You need to either never do this job again,
right.
or be somewhere where you can think about your actions. Usually that's like a jail cell or something like that.
People need to be in jail. I ain't opposed to it.
Yeah.
Particularly when you have sworn a duty to the Constitution. To your point, you have been conferred enormous power by the state to affect the lives of citizens. And if any time you see yourself as separate and apart from those citizens, you are likely a danger to those very people. And so there are ways that entire units of law enforcement probably need to be done away with and started over for real, because they are so corrupt. I have several really good friends who are law enforcement police officers, troopers, military people, and the like. And each one of them notes the importance of leadership in determining the culture of the units that they have been in. And so we have to be able to not be so enamored by the concept of the person's wearing the blue, that they're sacred and off limits. We have to really be willing to say, you are unfit for this job, given the power that you have and your inability to wield it with discretion, with diligence, and with humanity. Because we can't just have you out here shooting people up because you mad, or beating the crap out of people because they ran because they scared of you.